Hey, aloha, my friends, and welcome to a new session of Power Platform Learner to Leader. I'm happy to have you here in this session today, and you can already think about that, but it will be a very exciting session today, and I'm really delighted to have a super cool guy here who will present his session. So, before we come to this, let's have a quick overview about what we had on our page, on a plate for February already. So last time, if you have missed that session, best practices implementing Power Automate process mining with Lucas Jeravan was also an awesome session, which we have just aired on February 1st. If you have missed that session, you can just watch our video channel, and then based on that, you can rewatch that session. Today, we will have an awesome session thinking like a Power Platform architect with the awesome Neil Rowlands, which I will just let into the stage in a couple of seconds. And also fantastic other sessions with Copilot Studio and also with adaptive cards for Microsoft Teams. We're using Dataverse and PowerMate is on our agenda for February. So really, really cool sessions. I would be really happy to have you here and that we all learn together as well within these sessions. Before we start with Neil, first of all, what is Microsoft Learn and what is the Microsoft Learn community? So if you're here the very first time, maybe you haven't heard about that. So Microsoft Learn is a fantastic opportunity how you can learn Microsoft products in a very, very easy way. And the Microsoft Learn community is a collection of experiences which offers learners a variety of ways to connect and to engage with other learners and technical experts. That helps you to increase your knowledge, your expertise, and also become a rock star, maybe in the community, but also maybe at your work, and then you can just achieve your career goals. And they are also so-called learning rooms. So this, for example, is a learning room as well. And there's also other learning rooms, but obviously today, what we want to show you is about how you can join also the Power Platform Learner to Leader learning room. So about you can just click and browse the web page, which is https://aka.ms/join ppltl. And then you can also join our community as well. We have over 2,300 learners in that learning room, which is a great number. We have over 700 followers on LinkedIn, which is also a growing number. And we're really happy to have you and learn with us. So you can also find other learning rooms as well, as you can see here on the bottom, like where you can find more about Microsoft Learn community and also about the other learning rooms as well. And this is a really cool opportunity for you to learn. What is also important is that we have also a so-called code of conduct. So it is very important that we are aware of others, that we respect others, we are friendly and patient, we are welcoming, we are all open to any kind of questions, because in my opinion, there is no dumb question, there's always curiosity, and we also want to help others, and others can have also different viewpoints. And we understand that every people is different, and that's why we also should respect this as well. So be kind and considerate others, so that is very important. Thank you for respecting that. So in that case, I'm just bringing in now Neil to the stage. And welcome, Neil. Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Brilliant. Really appreciate that. So my name is Neil Rowlands. I'm going to talk about thinking like a Power Platform architect. So changing our mindset from being a developer to being an architect, or things that we'd think about early on in a project life cycle. So absolutely delighted to be here and share some of my experience with all of yourselves. A little bit about me. So I am a Power Platform architect. I've passed all the PL exams. I used to do a whole bunch of random jobs, then was a data analyst, then picked up Power BI, then became Power Platform developer, and now a Power Platform technical architect. So 2 parts to this. First of all, technical leadership. Second part is business partnering. So I delivered this talk a few times in person, and in person tried to get some engagement going. In this format, that's probably a little bit more difficult. So what we'll do is, if you've got questions, put them in the chat. and Belend will pick them up and we'll just talk about them at the end. I may pause briefly a few times to give yourselves an opportunity to think, because learning happens in our brain, not on a screen. So the more actively involved we are during a talk or a session, then the more we're going to learn, which hopefully we can then go back and implement in our workplace. So, first of all, quick reminder, Power Platform is for internal digital transformation. So we may be involved in a project from the early stage. So it's about helping an organization perform better itself and then reduce cost long term. There are some exceptions. Power Pages presents diverse data to people outside our organization, typically marketing and CRM situations. We can share Power BI workspaces with external guests. We can share Canvas apps with external guests, and we can embed co-pilots, formerly Power Virtual Agents, into websites. So we should just check, is Power Platform the right choice for the project? And is Power Platform one project within a wider program? So is this self-contained, or do we then need to work with an integration architect to integrate Power Platform with the rest of the program? Second thing about is, what is our role? What is our persona? So here are some job types. A technical architect, like myself, understands the technology well and then goes out into the organization to explain, clarify, develop, and lead on. A solutions architect is usually based in a part of the organization, and they take a different approach from a technical architect. A solution architect starts off with a business problem or a challenge and then finds different solutions to match that. So a technical architect starts with a technology, the solutions architect starts with a business problem. Integration architect, so if we need to combine different technologies together, technologies still don't talk to each other all that well. So an integration architect would lead on bringing those technologies together. So we've got three different architect roles, and then above that we might have an enterprise architect. So an enterprise architect is concerned with the organization as a whole. How do all the technologies fit together? Other roles, IT administrator. So somebody who is working in the central IT department and might be doing things like provisioning environments, provisioning access requests. We could be a developer who is based in the IT department. We could be a developer who's based outside of the IT department, or we could be a citizen developer, somebody who's embedded in the business and is learning Power Platform to automate tasks for themselves and their teams. So we should also consider, are we permanent or are we a contractor? If we are permanent, we're likely to have more influence over the project than as a contractor. Firstly, because we'll be more embedded within the organization in terms of meetings and building up the personal relationships that are important to allow us to influence decisions. Contractors are usually brought in to perform a particular task. So in general, contractors often have less influence over a project because they've got a more task-based role. How early in the project are we joining? If we're joining early on, then a lot of the decisions won't be made yet, so we can have more influence over those big decisions. If a project or program has already started and then we're joining, a lot of the big decisions have already been made, and we're going to have to work within the constraints of those early decisions. If we are some kind of developer and we're not sure exactly what our role persona is, then we can consider, what Power Platform Admin Center access do we have? So how many environments do we have access to? And are we a tenant admin? Are we system admin of those environments? The more environments we have access to, the closer we are to the IT administrator roles. Next up, we should consider out-of-the-box functionality first. So Microsoft advised us that we should consider Dynamics and the Dataverse Common Data Model. So Dynamics is the root of Power Platform. It's been around for many years. Why did Microsoft recommend Dynamics over Power Platform? We can think about that if we want. The answer will be coming up later. Dataverse Common Data Model Schema, if we've not heard of this, this is tables that exist in every environment, for example, contact, account, email, and these enable interoperability between environments and systems. So instead of having to rebuild an account table to represent an organization or a contact table to represent an individual, we simply pick those up. So they quick start our data model. And if we then need to move that data into another system, for example, an SQL server that also supports common data model, we know that our two technologies are going to match. So early on, we should evaluate both before we then assess Power Platform. Next up, every project needs to have data come into it. So what are our options? So Microsoft Forms. Simple, quick, it can have no validation or validation and sit outside Power Platform. Great for capturing surveys or very simple data. Canvas app, single-use data entry and review a user's own entries. So I want to make a request to have a car parking space or an eye care voucher. We've got, the developers have got full control over the UI and UX, so it can be self-presenting for the users. They can go and make their requests and they can go in and then review their own requests. Model-driven app, there are multiple user journeys. We don't have much control over the UI, UX. We can search and filter amongst records, and we can also follow a business process. So we should also consider desktop or mobile. Model-driven apps now support offline access. If we're in a workplace where we feel that mobile access should be needed, then as an architect, we might want to think, well, actually, where are our users going to be and do they have signal? So for example, if we're going to work for a warehouse company, we might think, well, Wi-Fi will work within our warehouse, but actually, are we going to be doing any picking or any welcoming lorries outside the warehouse, and does our Wi-Fi extend to there? As a developer, we wouldn't really think about that, but as an architect, we probably should. Also, how fast we want to develop. Generally take a little bit longer to develop a good quality Canvas app than it would to take a Dataverse table and then build a model-driven app around it. How will we display data? So a Canvas app is great for viewing my own and my team submissions. So single records or a group of records. What it's not very good at is browsing, filtering hundreds or thousands of records. Galleries are just not really set up for that. Model-driven app, by contrast, is fantastic for viewing, editing, processing thousands, tens of thousands of records. So if we're using Dataverse as our data, we could develop two different apps. So an app that goes out to our organization in order to capture data, so for our end users, but then the management team, the administrators of that data, could then have a model-driven app to then go through and understand and process all the submissions. Where will we store data? We've got a few options: SharePoint, Dataverse, Azure SQL, on-premises SQL, files, so CSV, JSON, XML. So these could be used for integration and reference data. When we're considering our data choices, we should consider data volume and velocity. So what are these terms? Volume means how much data. And we could think in terms of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions. So get some kind of idea as to how much data we're going to have. Okay. And how often is it going to change? That's velocity. If data is changing regularly, that's going to influence our decision choices. For example, files that change regularly might be a problem, but files, data where our data is quite static, then files could be an option. So our two most common data storage options in organizations are SharePoint and Dataverse. So we'll go through some of the benefits and disadvantages of each of these now. You might just want to think for a moment about your understanding of SharePoint and Dataverse, and then we'll see how that compares to what I prepared earlier. So SharePoint, great for smaller projects where there is small data volume and low velocity. So we don't have a lot of data and it doesn't change often. It's okay for small teams with a low budget. It's a familiar tool for business users. They've already built lists and built sites. Security, data modeling, and performance are not important because those don't really exist in SharePoint. It's really good for prototyping. If we want to build something very quickly and we don't have Dataverse set up, we could create a SharePoint list, build a Canvas app on top of that, and show that to our stakeholders, and they can see what an app and a user journey might look like. As an architect, I'd think if there's a likelihood that my prototype might move to Dataverse, I would then consider this from the beginning and make sure that my SharePoint data types matches what's available in Dataverse, because SharePoint and Dataverse data types are a little bit different, even though they're Microsoft products. So I would try migrating my data to Dataverse early on rather than later on. So maximum item limits. If we spend quite a lot of time building Canvas apps on top of SharePoint, we'll get familiar with these three numbers I put here: 500, 2,000, and 5,000. So when we create a Canvas app, in the general settings, there is a default amount of records that the Canvas app can process before it is unable to process more records. So this is called delegation. What does delegation mean? Okay, if I have a data source with 10,000 records and I want to filter or search on that, is it better to do that operation on the data source or on a user's device in a Canvas app on an old web browser on an old device that we can't control? It's always better to do the data operations on the data source. Some PowerFX formally enable that, i.e. are delegable, some are not. So 500 is the default upper limit of records that can be processed by PowerFX functions that are not delegable. We can go into settings, we can change that to 2,000, that's our upper limit. So earlier on we were talking about our data volume. If we're going to be having more than 2,000 records, then we should be aware of this and then structure our Canvas apps to avoid functions that are not delegable. Maximum item limits of 5,000. This is the upper limit that a SharePoint list view can display before it starts to not function. So data volume above 5,000, we'd be thinking SharePoint is probably not the best choice. Unreliable data saving. If we've tried doing patch to a SharePoint list and then we get a network connection fail, or we get a renaming issue, a SharePoint column has been renamed, that's not been updated in the patch, the entire patch will fail. It's very brittle. And updates and deleting records in SharePoint lists are very slow. Comparing that to Dataverse, so take a moment to think about what we know about Dataverse, and we'll see how this chalks up against SharePoint. So Dataverse is for business apps, where we've got medium data volume and medium data velocity. So it's good for if we've got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records. But if we're moving to the millions, or if we're having lots of updates on those records, we may want to consider Azure SQL or something like that. We have auditing. So auditing is a big win for any administrators of data in Dataverse. In model-driven app, we can turn auditing on in the tenant environment, the table, and all the changes to those records will then be logged and then made available so that team administrators can see that team member A made a change to record number 36 and the field was that, now it's this. Security. We've got lots of different security roles that we can configure. Data modeling, we can have relationships between tables. Offline for mobile is built in. So if we think about, we've got users who are on mobile, on their phones. This is good for typing in text notes. It's good for taking photos, but it's bad for files. We wouldn't, if we're doing mobile, we wouldn't want to put attachments in there. Data storage is very expensive. It's Microsoft's most expensive data storage product. The mass capability is fairly limited. We can do things like differences in dates. We can do sum, count, min, max, average, but we can't do too much on that. File storage, if we do enable that, then our capacity will grow very quickly. Not suitable for high volume archival data. So if you've got sort of millions of records that we don't access often, Dataverse may not be the best choice. Reliable data saving, but it is slow compared to Azure-based data products. So we're capturing data, we've got a data storage, but we might also want to bring data in from other systems. It's rare to have a project where it's completely greenfield and we don't need to migrate data in. How do we do that? A few options. We've got classic import from Excel. We've got data flows. Data flows, if we've not used them, is Power Query. So Power Query is familiar to anybody who's used Power BI. So Microsoft have moved Power Query from Excel into Power BI, and now it's also available in Dataverse to import data. We can use Power Automate, but Power Automate is also quite brittle. It's not an extract, transform, load tool. It doesn't really scale. There's not very much built-in error handling. So what's the best way at the moment to import data? So I'd say the best way at the moment is to import from Excel SharePoint. So when we go to create a new table, we now have an option to import from Excel or SharePoint. And this will actually create a schema for us and import data. So we can create a table from this. This will then move data into our development environment, and we can then deploy the schema of the solutions to our test and our prod environment. But how do we then get data into our live production environment? If we have Dataverse and we have a model-driven app, we can then import with an Excel template. So in a model-driven app, along the ribbon on the top, we can export and we can set our view up for the columns we want to include. We can download an Excel template. We then think like an Excel data analyst and copy our data into that template. And then we import that Excel template and the data into our production system. So this is probably the most efficient way to import data at the moment. If we're using Dataverse, but we don't have a model-driven app, we could build a model-driven app just for this one particular use case. We've also got logic apps. That's Power Automate built into Azure. So instead of it being used by business users, it's used by IT administrators. Different licensing, but similar connectors, actions, and triggers. So other data questions that we might want to consider early on in a project lifecycle. So do we have SQL server data? If so, we can present that in a model-driven app through the use of virtual tables. So a virtual table takes another data source and allows us to build a model-driven app on top of it. So it looks like it's Dataverse, but it's not. We don't have things like auditing because the source is not Dataverse, but it's a quick and efficient way to deliver an interface for users on non-Dataverse data. Document storage, instead of using attachment columns within Dataverse, we might want to consider Azure Blob or SharePoint document libraries. Reference data. If we've got data that should be static across our environments, for example, organizational hierarchies, like our department names, sub-departments, we want to consider how do we set that up and then keep that the same across our different environments. If we're then going to be doing imports, then we should check, do we have an on-premises data gateway in place? And then do a technical test. So early on in the project lifecycle, once we've made our technology decisions, trial a data flow or an import into both dev and prod. Why should we try this in both environments? Data loss policies. An organization may have different data loss policies in place for our production environments and may have a limited number of connectors in there. So rather than wait until I go live and then do an import, let's do a test earlier on, check that works, and then we can get that signed off to say at that point in time, our data loss policies, our environment structure enabled an import into prod. If we're coming into a project a little bit later, then and we've got a go live date of, say, Friday next week, then don't wait until Thursday to get access to the prod environment. Get access to the prod environment a week later, trial and import, get that access removed again, and then we can know that we can confident that we can do a migration to prod on a particular go live date. Do we need to do any integration? So do we need to integrate our Power Platform project with any other services? We could use Dataverse API, Azure Data Factory, Service Bus, Logic Apps. So we should consider how many connections between endpoints, and also are there going to be any inbound requests from other services? So let's say we're collating all this data about an organization, including HR data. Other business users might want to get access to that. So would we want to allow them to access a full HR data set, or do we then want to create a subset that other users can access? And we could use things like Power BI workspaces for that. How do we secure our data? So the four main Dataverse roles that we have are basic user, environment maker, system customizer, and system admin. System admin can do everything. System customizer, curious name. What this means is it can access the data in the environment. Environment maker can create apps and flows. Basic user is the lowest default role. Environment administration, so creating and applying data loss policies, so securing the use of connectors in order to prevent users from creating a flow that will then say everything that goes into my business OneDrive, and then I'm going to copy into my personal OneDrive. DLPs restrict that use case. Dataverse, lots of security options there, role-based, business units, teams, record level, column level. If we're using SharePoint, then as an architect, we should standardize and document locking down a SharePoint site. So effectively a template, this is how we do things here, so that our developers can then follow that process, because locking down a SharePoint site, different people will take different approaches. So set up a good approach once, allow others to replicate that. Connectors. So what classification of connectors will we have? Standard connectors that are included by default, and then premium where we have to pay more. There's also custom connectors. So if there is a technology product that does not have one of the 1,000 plus connectors available, then we can create a custom connector. So we take the published API and the custom connector is then a wrapper around that. That's also a premium service. Alternatively, if there's no connector or API available, we then fall back and use Power Automate Desktop. So that's remote process automation. If we think of something like Microsoft Access or some kind of organizational finance system that's quite archaic and we want to automate that, Power Automate will be the choice there. Thinking like an architect instead of developer, let's evaluate the project and list out all the connectors that we're going to be using. Then group them by classification. So arrange them into these four buckets here. And then let's match these up against the data loss policy. So let's find out if we might need to engage the IT department to change our DLPs. Then do a technical test. So create a basic flow or app with the relevant connectors, and then deploy this to prod and see if our app or flow works in the prod environment. If we do this early on, we then identify any particular technical problems that we need to resolve. Licensing. Okay, we've got the basic Enterprise E3 and E5. E5 includes Power BI Pro. We then got Dynamics, Power Apps Premium, Power Automate, Power BI Pro. It's a bit of a mess. No one likes Microsoft licensing, but as an architect, we're going to have to communicate licensing to our stakeholders. How do we do this? So let's quantify how many licenses of each type have been purchased. So engage with our IT department, list out all the licenses and put them in an Excel spreadsheet. How many of these have been purchased? Then review, okay, how many licenses of each type have been assigned? And then we can see there's a gap. We might have purchased 1,000 licenses, but only 800 of them have been assigned. And therefore, we've got a spare capacity of 200. So we could use those 200 without having to procure more. Then we can quantify how many additional users need to have each license type. And also then review what was the business case process for applying for funding. Okay, so that's maybe like a morning's work, but very useful. So the main factors in terms of licensing are going to be premium or custom connectors. So if we've got premium or custom connectors, we then need to have a Power Apps per user license. If we're using Dataverse, all of our users need to have Power Apps Premium or per user. Similarly with managed environments, all users of that environment need to be premium or per user. And also how many Canvas apps. If we are deploying 2 Canvas apps to all staff, then we could get away with using Power Apps, Power App per app licensing, as long as there's no premium connectors within the app itself. So how do we make sense of this? So here I've summarized and sorted our license costs from low to high. So we can see Power BI Pro, Power Apps Premium, lower. We can see E3, E5, quite expensive. Microsoft lists all their licensing in dollar, and these are then converted into UK GBP plus value-added tax. And then coming down the list, we can see Dynamics Customer Service Professional is $50 per user per month. We can compare this to Power Apps Premium, which is $20 per user per month. So Dynamics Customer Service Professional is 2.5 times the cost of Power Apps Premium. Coming back to one of our earlier slides, why does Microsoft push Dynamics over Power Platform? We can see why. They generate 2.5 times the amount of revenue. If we have Dynamics Customer Service Professional, that includes Power Apps Premium. Okay. What is an environment strategy? So we're probably all familiar. We have dev, test, and production environments. Optionally, we might have CI, continuous integration, multiple developer environments where code then needs to come into one place. We might have tests for internal testing and then UAT for testing by our users. We might have a pre-production environment, which is a replication of our prod environment with the same DLPs as a final test before we move to prod. We could have trading environments where we have anonymized lifelike data. We could have a build environment. So this would be if we're using Azure DevOps to deploy our code and we want to test our actual deployments. We don't want to test our pipelines on the test environment. We want to have a specific environment where our ADO engineers can create and test their pipelines. So we should also clarify what is our use of default environments. Should we be outreaching to our users to then have personal developer plan environments instead? Type environments can either be sandbox or production. So environment type. So production environment will be production. Our pre-prod environment might also be of type production. And then all of our other environments might be of type sandbox. So our dev, test, prod, this is the purpose of the environment. And then the environment type is either sandbox or production. Regions, every environment is assigned to a region. It's worth just reviewing to make sure that all of our environments are using the same region. We might want to group our environment lifecycle by business unit. So we might have a dev, test, and prod environment for HR, and a dev, test, and prod environment for finance. Or you might group environments by license type. We'll say that products that use premium connectors go into a premium stream. Projects that don't use premium connectors will go into a standard ALM stream. How we deploy our solutions? 3 options. Azure DevOps pipelines. Usually we need to have a DevOps engineer in our team for that. Manage environments for pipelines, or do we fall back to manual export and import? To help quantify this, we should understand and have access to Power Platform Admin Center. Also, the Center of Excellence Power BI reporting is excellent and will show us all environments, whereas Power Platform Admin Center will only show us the subset environments that we as an individual have access to. Once we begin collating data, we're then going to want to report on it. So we should consider early on a few things on this. So Power BI is our natural candidate technology choice. So when will we be thinking about reporting? Will we be doing this early on, or will we be doing it later on? If we think about reporting early on, we can then use that to influence our data decisions around schema. Who will be the report authors? Will it be our development team, business users, or a management intelligence, business intelligence team? Who administers the Power BI Online service? Are our key users familiar with Power BI Online? If not, then we need to engage and educate them. Telemetry, do we want to understand what's happening in Dataverse and other flows? If so, we can connect our Dataverse environments to Azure Application Insights and then create dashboards in there. Do we want to have any data governance? If so, we're going to be looking at Azure Purview, which is included in the E5 license. Moving on to the second part. So the first part is all technology. The second part is business partnering. So collaborating with key users to ensure that the project is successful. So project structure, do we have these functions in place? Delivery manager or scrum leader, business analysts and testers. If we don't have business analysts and testers, then the developers will be doubling up on that work, and that will then reduce their capacity. How do we track work? For example, in Azure DevOps boards, Jira, or project. How do we document things? So as an architect, we should set the standards. We should say, we should take a particular piece of implementation, document that well, and then share that with our developers to say, this is what I'm expecting. We should also consider what is the experience level of our developers. If they're junior, we need to spend time working with them and upskilling them. Who will maintain and service the project? So is it the developers themselves will be doing it, or do we hand over to another team to maintain? How do you bring the technical team and business users along with us? So as an architect, we're making a lot of decisions. How do we ensure that our technical team and business users know not just what the decisions are, but why we made those decisions? This will then ensure that they understand more about the project and the product that's ended up being created, and it will then reduce the amount of times they come to us later on to try to understand things. And do we manage developers ourselves? If so, then that's going to take time out of our working week. Wider business engagement. So we should understand who is the project sponsor. So these are things that as technology professionals, sometimes we don't always think about. Project sponsor is a single figure who is then responsible for the overall success or failure of the project, usually a senior individual within an organization. What are the expected outcomes? A lot of projects that may be defined but maybe not shared. What is the business case? So why are we doing this? Who are the key business representatives? What are the project timeframes? And who are the key IT department decision makers? For a successful deployment, it's not enough just to create some amazing technology. We need to work with people to communicate with our users about this new technology. We need to train users. We'll need to create some documentation or videos, and we also need to have a bug reporting process. Without those, then there's a risk the project may fail. So in summary, technical leadership and business partnering leads to informed decision making, and that's what architecture is about. So that's me, and yeah, just done that in 40 minutes. So Valent is popping back in and may have some questions from yourselves.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for that great overview. Especially if you're getting new into that kind of topic, it's great just to see what kind of components are in the Power Platform world, obviously. And it's important that you just know what to select. I would have also questions, but I'm also happy that there is someone with a question there, which I just would bring in with Joe Scully. So regarding the environment strategy, if you have a simple Canvas app solution with SharePoint backend, would you bother with dev, test, prod environments? Devs could work on new versions of the Canvas app without publishing them, and SharePoint would need copies of the site for dev and test. I mainly use dev, test, prod setup for Dataverse projects.
Great question. Thank you for raising, Joe. So if we don't have dev, test, prod environments, then our developers will be developing on an app that is being used by our users. And as soon as we press publish, our users are then going to be seeing the updated app. This means we're not really doing any peer review, we're not really doing any testing. So if it's a small audience and it's not a business critical app, then possibly. However, if it's a business critical app or if we're going out to all users or a large team, then I would recommend we have a dev test prod environment. So dev test environments will separate both the code and the data. What we can then do is we could duplicate and triplicate our SharePoint sites. So we then have a SharePoint site for dev, another for test, and another for prod. And we then use environment variables to dynamically point in the app between our three data sources. So it takes a little bit more time to set up, but it means as developers, we're not doing data entry or working on live data. So this would separate both our code and our data, so it means we're going to be making less mistakes overall.
Awesome. Thank you very much for answering. In the meanwhile, while we're just waiting for further possible questions, let me just ask another question. So you have shown a lot of components, which is really cool. What of the things you had also that comparison page between SharePoint and Dataverse? You have mentioned in both are slow. What would be a fast option, if I might ask?
Great. Okay, so SharePoint is super slow. That's why I put slow in uppercase. It can take up to a second to do an update of an item. Dataverse is much quicker, but when compared with Azure Cosmos or other Azure services, it is much slower. Now, Dataverse is built on those Azure services, but it is slower. Now, in terms of human readable times, we have a model-driven app. We click save. It's going to take under 1/10 of a second to actually save. But when we come back to data volume and data velocity, if we're then having hundreds of records coming in every second, Dataverse would not be the right choice. We'd then be building off some kind of Azure service and then using a virtual table and a model-driven app on top of that.
Makes absolutely sense. Thank you for answering the question. In the meanwhile, there's a new question just incoming. So what's your best advice for people transitioning from senior Power Platform developer to becoming a technical Power Platform consultant or an architect?
Great question. Thanks, John. Okay, so yeah, I was a Power Platform developer, contractor for a number of years, and this is exactly what I was thinking. So how do I move up? Because as a developer, I was just kind of doing similar projects again and again. So yeah, I kind of went from contractor to permanent. It's generally easier to take a step up when you're going into permanent roles. As a contractor, you're expected to be able to perform from day one, whereas in permanent member of staff, then there's an acceptance that you may not fulfill all the job criteria, but you'll then progress into it over the months and the years. So that's one option. Certification, if we've sat and passed most of the 6 PL 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 exams, PL 100 app maker's been retired, so that leaves 5 available now, then that's good. That shows that we know what we're doing. If we're in an organization and we're not thinking of leaving, we're quite happy in the organization, then I guess making friends with some of the senior stakeholders, building up really good personal connections, and then we can then ask if we can be involved in a project earlier on, or ask if we can be involved in a more interesting or a larger project, so we can extend our experience like that.
Awesome. Hopefully, John, that answers your question. Great question, by the way, as well. Cool. Thank you, Neil. There is a further comment. It's not a question. Beautiful day to everyone from Nigeria. Hopefully, you have a fantastic, more fantastic weather as we have it here in Europe at the moment. It's quite cold here. But thank you, for joining us from Nigeria. That's really awesome. Let's wait 2 minutes for additional question. I would also have another one, and this is one of my favorite ones. Is when I'm in client discussions, is that clients mostly tend to say Dataverse is expensive, and they prefer to stay in SharePoint, mostly because of they have the licenses for SharePoint and so on. So, what would be good arguments to convince that Dataverse is worth the investment?
A great question, and as an architect, we should be we're going to receive that question, so we should have an answer for it. So, if we think about if we build off SharePoint, okay, so how many items can we have in there? How does that limit our ability to actually develop? So Dataverse allows us to have more records, more reliable, more secure. So is security important? Is auditing important? Is relationships important? So yes, we're spending more money per user per month, but if we build a model-driven app off Dataverse, that's quicker than building a Canvas app off SharePoint. Okay, so yes, we're paying more in licensing, but if we've built model-driven apps off Dataverse before, we can build a model-driven app in a day or two. We can build a Dataverse schema in a day or two. So we actually get rapid application development. Whereas with Canvas apps, yes, Microsoft talk about it being quick, but usually if you're building a big Canvas app, it can take weeks or even months. So time for development is accelerated greatly if we use Dataverse.
Awesome. Thank you very much for answering. As you said, a question which always comes, especially one of my favorite questions, is obviously a cost question. Licensing question also comes a lot regarding this one. And sometimes we can answer the question, but sometimes you just need to study in a university to understand all that licensing which is coming across. Good. I'm just checking the chat. It seems like there is no further questions. So in that case, thank you very much, Neil, to be our guest here and share your knowledge with us. That was really, really great. And thank you everyone who just joined today. Hope you could learn something from Neil. I'm pretty sure you did. And hope to see you the next time again. So in this case, have a fantastic day and see you soon. Bye-bye.